Smallpox was considered one of the most deadly diseases in history, but today it's completely eradicated, save a few examples in labs around the world. But it wasn't always like that. Back in the 1800s and even the early 1900s, smallpox ravaged populations. It's estimated that it killed more than 300 million people since the 1900s. With a disease so prominent in human history, it's bound to play a main role in many nations' histories. And today, we'll be discussing one of those histories. Today, we'll be exploring the history of smallpox in the American colonies. But first, let's define the history of smallpox and how it killed so many. First of all, a little bit of science. Smallpox, in simple terms, is a virus. But since I assume you have a higher education than elementary school, we'll get a tad bit more technical. Smallpox is in the virus family of Poxviridae, also known as variola major. The major symptoms of smallpox are quite close to that of the common cold: headaches, back pain, chills, and high fever. But where it differs and gets its name from are the small red pustules that form all over the body. These pustules are filled with a pus-like fluid that, you guessed it, help transfer the disease. After about 8 to 9 days, the small pustules harden and fall off, leaving the victim with pockmarks all over their body. The pustules are a defining term of smallpox. The red bumps all over the victim's body are quite horrifying to look at, but they also serve their purpose quite well. When the victim died, someone came to take them from the home. When they were grabbed, these pustules would pop and pus would infect another victim. Smallpox, however, was not only spread through touch, it was also airborne. This was a huge part in the spread of the disease. Many people didn't understand what bacteria were, much less viruses. They didn't wear masks for health purposes, and they handled a sickly person almost the same as a healthy one. This lack of knowledge aided in the spread of the disease immensely. The mortality rate for smallpox was around 30%, mainly killing children and older people. Hope was, however, near. Edward Jenner, an English physician, noticed that milkmaids rarely, if ever, contracted smallpox. If you didn't already know, many organisms have close relatives. You do, for example, your cousins. Take ants, for example, as well. Fire ants and black ants are two different species, but they're still ants. They have similar structures and compositions, but they are not completely the same. The same goes for diseases such as smallpox. A close cousin to the smallpox virus, cowpox, infected cows. Milkmaids tended to catch it because of their work with the cows. It was, however, not lethal, and once they contracted it, they were immune to cowpox and smallpox. This gave Jenner an idea. Would it work for smallpox since they were so close? He tested it soon by making a small cut and putting the pus from a small scab into the cut. The boy drew a fever, but he lived with minimal effects. But Jenner had to see if it worked with smallpox, so he did the same thing but with smallpox pus a few months later. Days passed, and the boy was fine. The vaccine was successful. Soon, Jenner's method spread around, and thousands, if not millions, of lives were saved. A smallpox vaccine would be developed through the years, and in 1980, it was officially eradicated. Now that we have a basic understanding of the science behind the disease, let's discuss its importance in the colonies. Smallpox was first introduced in North America around 1520 by Hernan Cortes and his Spanish sailors. Once they landed, they were greeted by the natives. However, these natives didn't have immunization to the disease the Europeans had brought. They had never encountered these diseases before. Soon, the disease ravaged the local population, killing around 90%. The disease stuck around in North America and continued to kill natives. But in this episode, we're going to jump ahead to the early 1700s. Boston had been hit hard by the smallpox outbreaks. Inoculation was still not widely regarded as a safe method of vaccination. Like today, many didn't trust it. So, the disease continued to spread, leading to devastating outbreaks in 1721, 1752, 1764, and more. During the 1721 epidemic, a new character appears on our stage. Dr. Zabdiel Boylston. He was an American surgeon who had heard of the procedure from a man named Cotton Mather, more on him later. Sure of the method's credibility, he began inoculation during the 1921 outbreak. It was met with a backlash, as many didn't trust this new cure. Boylston had many death threats thrown at him, and he even had to go into hiding, but he persisted. He reported to the Royal Society in 1725, stating that 247 people inoculated, only 6 died, almost 10 times lower than the unvaccinated. As the years went on, the death toll among these inoculated became lower and lower. His efforts greatly helped in the fight against smallpox in Boston. As inoculation became more and more expected in the colonies, prominent figures began to get vaccinated. John Adams traveled to Boston to get inoculated in 1764, and Washington also demanded his troops to get inoculated. This decision was crucial in the colonists' victory in the war. The epidemic of 1721 was probably the most impactful of all the outbreaks. Smallpox reached the town of Boston on a trade ship, the Seahorse. One of the crew members had come down with the disease, and another was beginning to show symptoms. The men were placed under quarantine, but the disease still found its way out and had spread among the town in a few months. It hammered the town. Many in Boston didn't believe in the inoculation's effectiveness due to the rare cases where one would come down with the sickness and die. Reverend Cotton Mather was a respected man and a Harvard graduate. He strongly believed in the inoculations after hearing them from a West African slave, Onesimus. He soon had his son inoculated. Once the 1721 outbreak had started, he began to advocate even more for the procedure. But he was ridiculed by physicians and others. They believed that it would kill the healthy and spread the disease even more. He soon turned to Boylston, the physician we discussed earlier, for help. Boylston inoculated his son and 2 of his slaves, who contracted a mild case but soon recovered. They began inoculating more and more people, but people feared what they were doing. They threatened them with acts of violence, but they kept working. And in the end, over 6,000 people contracted the illness, among whom 850 died. It, of course, was not the last outbreak to happen, and Jenner's methods wasn't formed until around 1796. Discussing these smallpox outbreaks is kind of morbid, but it's essential. Epidemiology is the study of diseases and how they spread. This helps us predict how future diseases might act. If there are any other diseases, outbreaks, or general topics you'd like me to discuss, leave them down in the comments. That's all for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed.